should connect in a few minutes.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. My name is Alicia Robinson Asomane, and I am a CEO of a healthcare company. I'm a pregnancy loss advocate and a keynote speaker, and I raise awareness and support for bereaved parents. Today, I have with me the beautiful Megan, who will be sharing her story with us. Hi, Megan. Welcome to the show this afternoon.
Thank you for having me, Alicia.
You are very, very welcome. Megan will be sharing her story of baby loss with us. She'll be sharing about PTSD. Megan will also be sharing about how she has utilized baby loss, the resources and the services of baby loss charities. One in particular that was absolutely instrumental in her journey. And she'll be giving us some tips and some excellent ideas that have actually helped her. Welcome, Megan. Thank you so much for being here with me today. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you? I'm sorry if there's any delay coming through.
That's completely okay. Technology has a mind of its own, so it's perfectly okay.
It's so lovely to be able to join you today, Alicia, and to be able to share the conversation.
Not a problem at all. I'm glad you were able to join me.
Thank you. It's really good to be able to speak. We had some technical issues, didn't we? But we got there in the end.
I know. I mean, it was working perfectly fine before, but this does always happen, doesn't it? Always,
It
always
does.
happen. But
I
no
think I
problem.
live in a bit of a remote area.
That's perfectly fine. I'm sure we'll be able to help someone today. I'm sure our program will be able to give some instrumental, not necessarily advice as such, because we're not an advisory service. We are
Yeah.
a humanitarian platform, and basically, we just want women who have a voice to amplify their voices. Okay? Now,
Hmm.
Megan, having become friends over a short period of time and having shared conversations, I know that one of the things that you have at the moment, one of your diagnoses, is PTSD. Can you share a
Yeah.
little bit more about that with me, please?
So, post-traumatic stress disorder is an anxiety-based condition, and it develops sort of following an event that has been very threatening. It could be a life emergency, or it could be going through a very traumatic event where you perhaps see a loved one die. We usually hear about it more in combat, or can be veterans from war. But it actually is just sort of a normal response that anybody, when they face a sort of a traumatic event, in the initial days, everybody goes through those sort of processes where they're sort of struggling. We trigger the fight or flight response. With PTSD, it unfortunately means that whereas with the best will in the world, sometimes those feelings can heal and go away naturally. Unfortunately, if there has been a very significant and traumatic event and the support isn't there at the time, it can actually sort of grow then into more of a condition, which does have sort of its roots really within, I would say, sort of fear and pain. And it's about then working through sort of the traumas and the triggers that have caused you then to feel that very severe anxiety and stress response, to be able to use that and work through that in a meaningful way.
Mhm. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I know, well, I knew very little, and obviously, having met you, I've come to know a whole lot more. And I have a little bit more of an understanding as to the reasoning why, and like um, you rightfully highlighted that PTSD is pretty much generally known or associated with veterans. And to be
Mhm.
very honest, that was my idea. But then obviously what has caused us to cross paths is having lost a pregnancy or a baby. I will interchange the word as the program continues. So if anyone's listening to me, please don't think I'm undermining your experience if you refer to baby loss as pregnancy loss or vice versa. The two mean one and the same. Okay? Now, at what stage are you at in terms of having been diagnosed with PTSD, and how are you coping?
So I would say with PTSD, it's a condition that really goes hand in hand with kind of the triggers, and you have to identify sort of what your triggers are. So in day to day, the sort of I guess day to day triggers that I face have improved and got a lot better as I just became more really aware of I guess the resounding sort of trauma that was behind a lot of the triggers. So as I became more aware, I was able to cope with them. So I would say at the moment, my PTSD is in a place where, unless there's usually a trigger, which means a kind of key anniversary event, really, um, it is quite manageable. You know, I take antidepressants to stay on top of depression, and I also make sure that I get a really good night's sleep on top of sort of managing my mental health. So I make sure that I do have medication available if needed to get to sleep because I did suffer from insomnia. So I find that kind of a more holistic sort of lifestyle where you do work with, you know, mental health professionals that actually is sort of empowered to make those steps in your own life where you can access that support in a way that's sort of tailored to you. So with myself, there was a lot of a journey really of not just talking to people, but I am quite a curious person and I like to educate myself, not only for my own personal gain, but you know, sort of from my background and working with health to sort of help other people. So I was able really to access a lot of resources, books, anything and everything really that I could try to use to kind of understand why I was feeling this way, so that I could then kind of explore it. And I think it's sort of a given that usually one of the things with baby loss, although it doesn't make it easier, it is just sort of the passage of time because we do learn how to sort of cope in different ways and how to sort of breathe in a healthy way over time. So it's sort of as a condition on the whole, it's sort of very, I feel a lot more well managed in terms of I don't have the severity of symptoms that some people might think of when they naturally think of PTSD. You know, for instance, suddenly having a very severe flashback or potentially, you know, avoiding everything completely. I don't experience those symptoms anymore, but there are still things that will upset me. So I find that it really just, I guess, a case of awareness and being aware of how to manage those best if you are faced with a situation that is a little bit upsetting, just taking that time to kind of acknowledge that emotion, feel it for what it is, and then be able to process it in a healthy way. So it has, yeah, it's a good place the last sort of, particularly with the last sort of year, especially since the first anniversary of my daughter's passing, so within the kind of last 7 to 8 months. Um, been in a much better and a much healthier place. Glad to report for everyone.
That's great. That's really good. The next question that I wanted to ask, you've kind of touched on it. I wanted to ask you, so generally, what does PTSD look like in someone who's experienced baby loss? Now, there are lots of people out there who don't know, not because they choose to be ignorant, but because they genuinely don't know. Like myself, I think I'm well read in many aspects of things, obviously, but none of us know it all, and every day
Yeah.
is a learning day. So how is PTSD for someone who has experienced baby loss? What does it look like, and how can we be a little bit more conscious when someone like yourself has said, I've had a diagnosis after a traumatic, maybe not even pregnancy loss in some instances, just, a difficult
Yeah.
pregnancy. What does it look like?
I think that the first thing that people, I guess, need to realise with PTSD is that it's just a response to a traumatic event. So you can't, for instance, I guess, as you said, people that potentially aren't aware or educated in the condition may make an assumption on why you've developed it. However, as most women that have had a baby, regardless of whether the baby has lived or not, it is traumatic to give birth. It's one of those experiences as women that, it's kind of like a once in a lifetime experience that people talk about. And actually, it's very, if things, even if things don't go wrong, actually it can be just very traumatic for women, because the thing I think with birth loss, and especially with babies, with miscarriage, with stillbirth, is that actually alongside having that very mental, emotional trauma, you have physical trauma as well. So, you have the physical pain of giving birth, particularly if you do know that when you're going to give birth, potentially the baby may be dead. So these are real physical feelings that you feel at the same time as feeling very sort of emotionally distraught. So it's really easy to think of how the brain can kind of latch onto those things and to associate them together. And it's completely natural for sort of, I guess, the brain to be like, that's really painful. I don't want to touch that area. I don't want to talk about it because it's going to cause me a painful response. And so that we don't want to address it. So, for instance, for somebody, and this could be a completely different circumstance, but for miscarriage, for instance, if somebody has miscarried a baby, if they've miscarried potentially at home, that can then create a lot of trauma within the home for that lady, whether that's, whatever environment it can be, they can attach that then to the place where potentially the baby has died. So that can be a key sign of a lot of difficulty in actually just sort of day to day things around life, sort of in your own home. There's other triggers which I think we're all sort of all very aware of, and that every woman faces when they have sort of baby loss. So, seeing pregnant ladies at first is a really painful thing for
It's a
everybody.
big one.
Um,
It's a big
and
one.
it is, and going to sort of, baby aisles and shops. And as much as you can try and limit the exposure that you might have to something painful, you can't avoid it, because when you get to the point where you're completely avoiding it, it has a significant impact on your life and your daily function. And it's being able to kind of realise actually where the symptoms are coming from, and they're completely healthy, because it's completely healthy and normal for a woman to feel upset around another pregnant woman when they've had a loss, and that isn't an abnormal feeling. But if it is, for instance, getting to the point where you don't want to, leave the house, you don't want to get into that shop because you're so worried that you might feel this or be upset, that's the sort of time when you may have to then think about actually getting some support. And usually, I guess, one of the things with ladies that potentially do go on to develop trauma is that there is sort of a big issue around actually the support that's there. And one of the biggest risk factors for developing PTSD is not having having access to appropriate support after the trauma, or re-traumatizing events. So, for instance, you know, sometimes it's not as just you go to the hospital and come out. There's a lot of investigations or processes, and these can be traumatic in themselves. And kind of as a person facing repeated trauma, it's very easy to see then how the brain can sort of become overwhelmed and start to think, well, if I do this, I'm going to get a really upsetting response, so I don't want to do it. And it's sort of being really aware of, I guess, those key signs of when it becomes really, and why it's so important actually to sort of, I guess, have somebody around you that is able to say, where there is a problem, when things are natural, because there's nothing completely about any of the emotions that are unnatural. A lot of PTSD comes from fear, fear of what happened to you, which was a very traumatic and upsetting event. So it's not an unnatural response for the brain to want to protect itself. But when we do find that it's getting to the point where you can't function, you can't just get on with things, you can't leave the house, it's about then kind of being able to sort of step back and take that time to prioritise getting the support.
Hmm. Thank you so much. You've touched on quite a number of important points. Now, some of the things that I've learned from my recent readings and research on PTSD, I was looking at some of the key symptoms, um, things along the lines of nightmares and flashbacks,
Mm.
which you touched on. There are things like distressing thoughts about the event, There's that hopelessness that comes with it, that difficult feeling of feeling positive about anything, especially when the trauma is new. Um, Now there are things around hyperarousal as well. So there,
I could give, I guess, a bit like for me, I can give an example of when I felt that it was a bad day with PTSD and how it would actually, I guess, look to me. So it would be a case of, it would get to sort of 6 p.m. in the evening and I'd start to become very aware at the time
Mhm.
because I was very aware at the time that my daughter was born and the time that she died. So as soon as it kind of got to an evening time, I noticed it myself that I was suddenly very aware. I was listening for things, just watching out for things, not really feeling like there was anything about to happen, but I start listening. And then that would, because obviously I'd be so anxious, it would interrupt sleep. So I wouldn't kind of drift off easily. And then if I did drift off, it would usually be around 2 hours and then a nightmare. And for me, my nightmares weren't exactly the event itself, but there were sort of very similar emotions playing out.
Mhm.
So obviously, when you do experience a nightmare, that becomes in part of the problem itself because you don't want to sleep. Because sleep is that place where you think that you can have your restful period, wake up and feel refreshed. But if you're having nightmares that you can't avoid, or are like things that you potentially haven't been confronting, it's really difficult to manage that. And it would then send me where I would then wake up at sort of 2 o'clock in the morning and I would just sit downstairs. But it was like, I just sit on the sofa and I'd imagine it as like a film playing out in my head, and it would just be a film of that kind of night. And then I'd find myself sitting there looking at notes and different things, and it became when I sort of had those, it got to a point where there's a kind of healthy curiosity and there's a healthy kind of need for answers. But then there's also this unhealthy side with PTSD, which can become quite absorbing, hyperfixation, where it does interrupt them because I could sort of, I guess, sit in my thoughts and be lost in my thoughts for a few hours before kind of coming out of it. And when you are sort of dealing with that and when you're thinking, I guess, repeatedly, you can't help it about something very sad like a death, it just feeds into why then depression gets so hard because nobody would want to replay that event all the time. But sometimes with PTSD, you just can't stop processing it. You can't stop thinking of it, whether you want to or not. And that's the thing that people don't understand, I think, necessarily, is that it's not your own choice to be able to go drifting through memory lane. Nobody would really, I don't think, would want to do that. If you ask people that have gone through an upsetting situation, nobody would actively choose to sit and reminisce on the worst things. But it's sort of when you get to that point where, if you're thinking about it and it is intrusive, that actually you need to sort of, I'd say at that point, it's that accessing then support. And for me, that was one of the sort of signs for me where I was sort of like, okay, I know as myself that this is sort of becoming something that I'm thinking about in a healthy way and I'm talking about, but it's going to the extreme. It's
Key points that you've touched on. I think our signal is going a little bit weird again. Um, are you there, Megan? Can you hear me? Okay, Megan seems to have dropped off. Are you there, Megan? Can you hear me? Hi, Megan. Hi, Megan.
oh hi, I lost contact. I can see you again now.
Yes, you did. It's okay.
Apologies.
No, it's not you. It's just the connection between us. Like you said, the fact that you obviously live in a remote area,
Yeah.
it does impact
Uh,
our recording. But never mind, we're gonna get our point across.
they haven't seemed to improve the infrastructure throughout Norfolk just yet. It's not up to understand in the UK.
That's completely okay. Like I was saying, you touched on some really, really important. Now, one of the things that I learned, um, and you made mention of it as well, is that PTSD is it's a response to any type of trauma. Okay. Um, many people develop it after some kind of a heartbreaking loss. It can be a loss of something that is endearing to you. It could be the loss of a person. Could be the loss of a pet for some people. But for the purpose of our program, we just want to highlight that PTSD is not a sign of weakness. Um, Obviously, you highlighted that the reason why you had it obviously because of the traumatic birth and loss of your little girl. Now, I I'm not discounting in any way anyone's experience of baby loss. I too have experienced it. I know the challenges, I understand the challenges. Our situations are not identical. But the good news is that support is available for us. And I know that you were only able to get through the difficulty and the challenges of your the loss of your daughter because you were able to access help. There's so much help available now. There are two aspects of help that you spoke to me about, one from a local church and one from Sans Baby Loss charity that's doing an absolutely incredible work, and we just want to recognize the work that they're doing today. Now, can you speak to us, Megan, a little bit about the help you received, firstly from the church and then from Sans?
Yes, so in terms of the church, I must be quite open, and I wouldn't exactly say that I'm a religious person, but after the passing of my daughter, I think when anybody faces grief, it does, force it gets them to think about, I guess the bigger things in life, the questions that we may not have thought about before, and but like I said, I am not somebody that would, actively, I guess, say I belong to a particular church, but there are a range of different services, and for instance, in Norwich, there is a charity called Time Norfolk, and when there is Baby Loss Week, they pair up with the local Norwich Cathedral so that they're able to provide a service, which sort of it's a really beautiful service where you're able to sort of light candles and meet other parents. And this for me was, I went along to a service. My daughter's funeral coincides with Baby Loss Week, which at the time felt very upsetting, but I think in a kind of strange way now, it is quite nice because people are already kind of having those conversations about baby loss. So I guess when it does come to a sort of anniversary of the funeral, it doesn't feel so. Because it feels so strange for saying to people, look, this is actually a really difficult time because the focus that week is on it. So during that time as well, because it coincided, the church and Time Norfolk joined together to provide this service, which just allows all families to come in, light a candle, has speeches and speeches from different ladies that have accessed the service, and about their sort of journeys and stories. And I guess one of the things that had for a while sort of put me off is the idea that I wasn't with sort of the father of my daughter, and I'd always felt a little bit, I guess, left out because I just felt insecure about that I wasn't with the father anymore, or that I didn't necessarily have was able to access these things. But I was sort of reading a lot about it, and I felt it was going to be quite a safe space because there was actually quite a lot of female speakers and a lot of different women. And sometimes if you are anxious, actually, just having that bit of security, knowing that there's other women around you that have gone to the same space. And by providing that service, like I said, it was one of the first times for me that I was able to sort of be in a collective sort of, I guess, experience, be able to be around other women that were experiencing a loss, and that were sort of during that, like I said, at that service, I had spoken to other people via SANS, which we'll, I guess, move to a little bit later, but I hadn't sort of face to face really spoken to another woman that had had a loss, because it had just been it's always a raw thing and it's emotional. And actually, that experience by just sitting, and I was supported by my new partner, and he came with me, and it was really lovely. And having other women around me, and not just other women of the same age, grandparents, other babies, small children, the experience of just having everybody around you and that free of judgment. There was no judgment there. Everybody was showing their emotions honestly. People were speaking from the heart, and it was just such a heartwarming experience. And for me, I guess as somebody that had been very alone during the time, it was important to feel that collective sort of love, because nobody should feel alone during a time like that. And if you do feel alone, I just want to say, it's not anything on you. It's that you've got the wrong support around you, and you just need to find the right people that will guide you, look after you, and care for you, because they do exist. And it's actually through charities that you get to meet these people. And when people say about the kindness of strangers, it is really true. With charities, I know that we just mentioned SANS as well. SANS were really I'd say one of the most helpful charities in terms of just helping my healing, because the SANS website does offer lots of different forms of support. Whether you want to, ring them up, and I have rang them up on their helpline, and it's just helpful to speak to somebody that's empathetic. Whether you want to go to a face-to-face event, whether you actually just want to talk on their social media to other women. And having that peer support for me was something that I really needed at that time, because I didn't have it in my own life. I didn't have it sort of accessible to me easily. So being able to just have a platform where you can put a message up, might just be a quick 5 minute rant, or just, or actually really vulnerable, so you're feeling really emotional, and to have other women that are sort of commenting and giving their input and just saying to you, actually, you're not alone, is was probably one of the biggest things for me, and probably one of the more transformational things, because it's what I really needed to hear at that time, is that you're not alone, and that there are other women that, even though we've all got unique circumstances, we all share the same pain and we share the same grief. So it actually helping to just develop, listening to other women and their stories, and showing empathy and kindness, and learning how to do that, and just, I guess, becoming more open about discussing things, not necessarily feeling that guilt or shame, which is a big thing that a lot of women feel when they've lost their child.
This, oh my goodness, Megan. I
Huge.
was so ashamed of myself. I was
Yes,
so
that.
ashamed of myself. I could
Uh,
not, couldn't look at myself in the mirror for, I'm sorry to have interjected, couldn't look at
no.
myself in the mirror for a very long time. I felt like I'd let my husband down. I felt like I'd let my parents down. I'm a firstborn child. And
Yeah.
especially on the day when I gave birth to my first loss, I could hear, like, literally my dad was so broken, and I felt so guilty, and I felt, even to date, I don't think I can ever, even though I went on to have, I have three beautiful children, but the brokenness I heard in my parents' voice, and the fact that, like you rightfully said, your family isn't so easily accessible, because my family live in a whole different continent,
Yeah.
and the brokenness I heard in my parents, I felt like I'd stripped them of their happiness, their joy. I felt like I stripped my husband of his happiness. I just felt so ashamed of myself. So thank you for touching on that. Now, in terms of anyone who has recently experienced or has experienced baby loss some time ago, but is feeling that sense of shame, or is will go through it maybe sometime immediately or in the near future without obviously knowing, what would you like to, how encourage them, pretty much? Would you take a minute or so to do that for me?
Yeah, I would. I would say, I guess speaking from my own experience, I carried a lot of shame and a lot of guilt, because my circumstances were quite unusual, and also because I had given birth in the community, I didn't have medical professions at the time, and it was sort of, it filled me with a lot of shame for a long time, because I felt sort of like, gosh, I could, what, like, should I have done more? Could I have done more? And I dragged myself over hot coals, and it was like a decision where it was like, this is sort of what happened, and you made the best decision at that time with the information that you had available. And the information later that I did have, definitely showed that my daughter had the with ambulance times, and not there was very
the
little I could
information
do, but I
later
still
that I
carried
did
that
have,
great
definitely showed that
shame,
my
and
daughter
I
had been
didn't
stillborn.
speak about it.
And
With
and
ambulance times,
instead of,
because I think with
there
shame, it's
was
one of those emotions that we really you don't want to
really
admit
not
to
there was very
feeling,
little I could do, but I still
and
carried that
you
great
can kind
shame.
of.
And I didn't
I
think
think
with shame,
everybody
I
tries
think everybody
to
tries
hide it.
to hide it.
Um,
Um,
so I would
so
say
I would
it's one of
say
those
it's one of
ones
those
that
ones that
I think one
I
of
think
the
one of the
best ways for
best
somebody
ways
that
for
is
somebody that is
experiencing that
experiencing
still
that still
is to say
is
to
to
them
say to
first
them,
and
first and
foremost, you are
foremost, you
not
are not
alone for
alone for
experiencing that,
experiencing
and it's
that, and it's
completely
completely
normal and
normal and
natural.
natural.
So
Um,
Um,
thank you for touching on
it's
that. It's so
yeah,
important. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm just
yeah,
yeah,
reiterating
it's
what
just
you're saying.
yeah.
yeah.
Sorry,
Sorry,
just
just
to
to
say
say
that
that
it's
it's
completely
completely
natural
natural
and
and
it's
it's
normal
normal
to
to
feel
feel
like
like
that
that
when
when
you've
you've
gone
gone
through
through
that
that
trauma
trauma
and
and
that
that
loss.
loss.
And
And
like
like
you
you
touched
touched
on,
on,
speaking
speaking
about
about
your
your
identity,
identity,
other people's expectations in you, and actually with child loss, it is a very unique type of grief and loss because there carries because it's never ever going to feel, natural. It isn't natural in the life events, and we don't have those memories that we can sort of reflect on that other people would have when you lose potentially sort of an elderly loved one. So it is very normal to look at your behaviour and to look at that and to feel that. But I think it's sort of the biggest thing is to say compassion and self love. And I know that sounds like it's such a hard thing when you feel so worthless, or when you feel that it's such a hard thing to say you deserve to have that kindness to yourself and you deserve that love, but you do deserve that kindness
Mm-hmm.
because actually it's not your fault. And when you think about it, if you had the information that you have now, would things be different? They would. Most of us would say, yes, if I knew I had this wrong with me, if I knew I had this, I would have done something. I would have gone sooner. I would have demanded a second opinion. I would have asked to see another doctor. But there's all parts that I think every woman has that they regret, that they think, oh, maybe I could have done this, maybe I could have done that. And that's natural and it's normal. And it might always be that you always feel a little bit of that. But it's okay to just to say, be kind and be compassionate and give
To
yourself the
yourself.
time to feel it through and reflect.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with you. You have to be gracious to yourself and also understand, as hard as it is, this is just a phase.
Mm,
I'm not being demeaning, but as tough as it is, you will get through this. It's a passing
yeah,
phase. Seasons of life change. This is just a tough season, and we have to face the
yeah,
reality of that. And it may not necessarily be um PTSD diagnosis. It may be depression. It may be anxiety. It could be uh, any other diagnosed mental health illness. Or you could just purely just be having mood swings and feelings of lowness. You may not necessarily have a diagnosis as such. Be gracious to yourself. Give yourself grace. One of the things that you touch on, and we're going to give a good few minutes to saying thank you to the charities like the Miscarriage Association and SENS for the incredible work that they do. Because to be very honest, many days I was just, when I could get to it, I would just lay in my bed and read about other people's stories and feel empowered. Or I would
mm,
just read about these incredible people who are volunteers who take their time out to just serve women like you and I in the community just to ensure that we are
mm,
okay. So we're going to take a good few minutes to say thank you to a few of the charities that we know. I don't know too many of them, maybe about six, seven, that I've been doing some reading and research on. But we absolutely are thankful for the incredible work that you do. There are women in the community as well who are championing the cause of better maternal health care. We are so grateful for your work. Again, we believe that individually, as a person who is affected by pregnancy loss, whether you're male or female. Individually, you're just a voice, but together we're a roar. We are a loud roar, and it's unfortunate that we have to come together to roar for better maternity care, whether that's drewing or whether that's after. But yeah, we are here to make our voices known and to make impact. Again, like I said, we are not counselors. We are not advisors. We are just women, men. You will see some men in the program as well who are determined to get together and roar loudly to enable each other to have a positive or as positive a birth experience or pregnancy experience as possible. Now, Megan, what are some of the barriers that prevent people from seeking help from baby loss organizations, even when they know they need it the most?
So I think one of the biggest barriers to accessing the support, I think in the first case is like I said that there is with child loss and with baby loss, there is actually a lot of blame, guilt, and there's a lot of trauma, and a lot of women can actually experience not particularly empathetic care or compassionate care. And they can also, if you do experience that from a healthcare professional, it can actually place a huge barrier in the way of wanting to get more support from them in the future. Because if you do not trust them, or if you do not feel that, if you feel that you've potentially been discriminated against, you do not feel listened to or validated, you aren't going to speak to those people, even if they've got the thing that you need. You're just not going to do it because it's painful. And also, one of those things that goes hand in hand with that sort of anger is it's completely natural, I think, for people when they have experienced that to become quite combative or defensive. And it's actually from, a lot of them, professionals may think we can't work with this person, or we haven't got the same goals, or they don't want this care. And it's actually been like, well, this person might, actually might really need this care. And because they're in that place of feeling a lot of pain at the moment and also anger, they're being defensive, they're not being able to just say to you, look, I need this help. Because they're worried about judgment and they're worried about if it's going to be available to accessing it. I think another huge area is just there are inequalities in maternity care throughout the UK, throughout the world, and that differs from different communities as to why there isn't that access. And that can be, that can go on to probably to a whole other different area into the inequality in health,
Yeah.
but it is a barrier, within different communities, locations, actually having access to those resources available. And I think another one is it's quite natural when you've gone through a baby loss that you're going to feel very, I would describe it in the initial days were very much like an overwhelming sadness. I felt very sad. It was like a sadness that kind of went to the bone at some points because it just felt like this is the worst, and nothing will get better again in the early days because it's just that raw. And the last thing you want to do necessarily is pick up the phone and speak to somebody. Um,
Exactly.
Especially when you might feel that what you want is more of a friend, but what's on offer is, something very clinical or a healthcare professional, and actually they're kind of paid. They're paid to do their job. I don't feel like it's very genuine or that they want to be with me. And actually, that can build up a huge barrier in the way of people wanting to work with health professionals or feel that they have sort of their best interests at heart. And I think that is something that I think potentially needs to be addressed in some ways because the initial support available to all women when they're in the hospital or when they're going through the loss isn't always there. And then when they get to the community, they can fall through the gaps because they haven't got that person to sort of check in regularly with them. They haven't got that follow up. So I think that can be a huge barrier because it hasn't actually been identified in the first place that there's a problem or that they need that extra support. And that can be a huge barrier then in them accessing that support when they really do need it.
I'm so happy again that you touched on that because one of the things I always say is that I've maintained a relationship with my bereavement midwife She's an absolutely phenomenal lady. Um, and she stayed with me throughout my 5 pregnancies. Now, again, there were gaps in my care. And I'll mention one of them. And before I mention it, I want to reiterate that I have experienced good care. So it's
Yeah.
not an opportunity to say, oh my goodness, woe is me, or it's all bad. It's very important for me to highlight that amongst the thousands of women, millions of women, hundreds that I know who have had baby, because I belong to a church community, so I do know quite a few hundreds of women. Um, they too have received good care, whether it's just general health care or maternal health care. However, until I had a chat with my bereavement midwife in my final pregnancy, which was my 5th pregnancy, I wasn't seen from weeks 16 to weeks 32 of my final. I mean, it's unheard of.
It's
And every
shocking.
single time I tried to contact my midwife, it was like I was busy, or there was always something. Oh, I've changed you to next week, or I've changed you to later in the day at a time when I am not available. So in my 5th pregnancy, having had 2 pregnancy losses with 3 babies, because one of my pregnancy losses was twins. Um, I was just left for 16 weeks without any maternal care, and because of maternal age, because I was over 40 at the time, also because I was high risk in terms of underlying medical conditions. I should have had not only consultant led care, but I should have been seen, much more frequently. And I mean, there's
And
so many gaps.
that's when you kind of get as well, because you didn't get that care from 16 to sort of the 32 weeks. Potentially something could have happened to the baby, but you didn't know.
Anything could have happened. Anything could have happened. And I had to heavily, again, rely on information from charities. Now, I mean, more and more people are using AI at the moment, but then at the time, it wasn't as popular as it is now. So
Yeah,
I would just do a whole lot of Googling. And thankfully, my last pregnancy was, or is my now soon to be 2-year-old daughter. And she was I really enjoyed her pregnancy, because
yeah,
with the others I was ever so anxious, and I got to a point where I'm like, you know what, I am going to be intentional about enjoying my daughter's pregnancy. We went to find out
yeah,
very early that it was a little girl. We were super excited, and I was like, I am not going to ruin this, because one of the challenges that I had in my pregnancy after my first loss, who is now my soon to be 6-year-old son, I was overly anxious in that pregnancy. I was depressed, I was
mm,
anxious, I was frustrated, I wasn't my true self. I felt like I wasn't meeting societal expectations. I was really, really hard on myself. And at one point, we were told that my son could be autistic, and I blamed myself again. And
yeah,
and so, I mean, I relived every ounce of not only the pain of my first pregnancy, but then it was now shame and blame, because if I had only enjoyed my second pregnancy, who is now my first son, then I wouldn't have imposed this on him. This wouldn't have happened to me. And it was such a mental battle. I felt
mm,
like um I was so ashamed of myself, but not only that, I felt like I had given my son a battle to fight that he didn't deserve to fight at such a young age. And I hope this is making sense to someone out there, and I hope that you can put the dots together. It really is a challenge, and as mothers, as women, we really need to get to a place where we take a hold of our mind, because that's where the battlefield is. And I
mm,
found that, and I'm not saying that it's easy, because with some people they will need professional help. Please access help. It's available. Okay? Please don't sit in your homes and shut your families away, shut your friends away, shut the professionals away. Help is available, so please maximize. Megan, I want us to now. We've touched on PTSD, which you
Mhm.
ever so kindly educated us on. We also touched on the church that helped you. We're going to put tomorrow on LinkedIn, and later we're going to try and put some kind of a like a hashtag on the name of the charity or the church rather. So if people want to get in touch with them for help, they can. Remind me again of the name of the charity, please. The church.
So it's Time Norfolk, and they work with the Norwich Cathedral.
Fantastic. So if you're in the Norwich area, then help is available. Please do access the necessary help, okay? Some people have WhatsApp groups that they've joined. Some people have Facebook groups that they've joined. Some people have neighborhood watch groups that they've joined. Help is available. You are not alone in this. And being diagnosed with any kind of a mental health condition or um, any kind of a stress associated condition, being diagnosed with PTSD, it's not a sign of weakness. Okay, this is the
And that's,
stage.
yeah, that's the thing. I think that yeah, really important because, like you said, it's completely natural. It's not a sign of weakness, and
It's not.
actually by taking that first step to acknowledge it and get that support means that you are in a place where you can feel happy again, where you can start to enjoy life again. And actually it came to me where I reflected quite heavily on, as you do when you lose a child, the purpose of life. And when you can feel very depressed about actually sort of, I guess, the meaning of things and what you want to sort of achieve. And it was really important to me that I was able to get to the best place that I could be, to be the best sort of, just not the, nobody's perfect, but to be the sort of best friend I could be to people, to be the best nurse I could be, to be empathetic and to be listening.
Yeah.
So it's really important for people to just, like I said, even if the people around you aren't being supportive, they're just not the right people. That there are the people there that will listen to you and will accept you and embrace you, and there is no shame, because I can guarantee everybody that whatever feeling you're feeling, there's probably, not in a way, I always think this is a positive, but there's probably somebody, not a positive for what's happened, but it's likely that somebody in the world has gone through a situation very much like yourself.
Hmm.
So actually, you can find people that can relate, and they can relate in a way that you won't find in normal society. You won't find it if you're just going outside walking down the street. You sometimes have to look a bit further, but it is there, and they will support you.
Hmm. Um, Something that you told me that really touched my heart was about the aching arms teddy. I thought that was
Yes,
the absolute
I-
sweetest thing. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Oh, Teddy is here with us. Tell us
I've
about
got
Aching
Teddy.
Arms Teddy, please.
So I have a teddy that was donated by the parents of George Edward Ricketts, who passed away on the 20th of February 2022. So actually, when I went onto the website and found out about Aching Arms, it was very early following the loss. And unfortunately, everybody knows that it's gone through loss. It's a very stressful time. There can be relationship breakdowns, and if you don't have very close, sort of, if you don't have, people close at hand, it can be difficult, as we spoke about, sort of accessing the support of your family are further away. So I went on to the website and I saw that they provided these free of charge, which was also really handy because planning a funeral, even though they do provide, basic funeral costs, which are covered in the UK, anything like flowers or even the little things that might mean something you have to pay for, and they're quite expensive. You wouldn't think it, but flowers can be expensive for a funeral, even just a basic sort of bouquet. So the kind of was quite a bit of money was tight also. So I went on and I saw that they offered the teddy bear donated in memory, and it was something that as soon as I saw it, I wanted one. I just thought, I need to have one of these teddies. And I got the teddy sort of just before the funeral, sort of prior to sort of my daughter's coffin coming overnight. And this little teddy stayed with me to the funeral. It stayed beside my daughter's coffin. It went to the funeral, stayed beside the flowers. And after the funeral, which I don't think many people speak about after the funeral, but if you are somebody that doesn't have much support, it was a case for me of returning home to an empty house, where I had my daughter, with me, I guess, in the coffin the night before, but now she'd gone for the funeral, and it was really difficult. And I didn't have close support there at the time available for me. But one of the things I did have was this little teddy, and I know to some it might seem something very small or very simple, but actually that feeling of when you've lost a child, when you've given birth to a child, that maternal instinct, and a little teddy can be a huge thing that can help you feel some connection, even though that connection, that physical connection, may not be there anymore. And so, actually, this little teddy in those times really gave me strength. I've got sort of no shame in saying that night I came back and I popped the little teddy in like sort of one of her little dresses that she had, and ever since that time, it was sort of okay. I want to. This is a really good cause and really meaningful. And so since then, with Open Arms, I've donated a few teddies, which actually provides me, I guess, on a personal level, a lot of comfort to know that they're out there. And it meant so much to me to get this teddy at the time, and that hopefully it will go to somebody else that really needs it. And actually, the importance of having things like this, because women can face women in all different social circumstances, but if you are somebody facing financial hardship, especially, alongside the loss of a child, a relationship breakdown, it's really important that you have some support in whatever way. And for me, having this and knowing that there was another family that had, been so touched and donated this in memory of their child, thinking of me whilst I was not, on a personal level, but I felt their love, and it was a symbol of love. And so, for yes, little Ted has stayed with me all this time, really, and I keep the little tag on, so I can always remember sort of the little baby, George, that's in memory of. And yes, it's just something that was so meaningful that I guess people perhaps wouldn't necessarily think would be so meaningful, but it just shows that in times where there can be quite hardship, there can actually be a lot of kindness as well. And like I say, kindness from strangers or organisations, people that you don't know, that it does exist, and it's worth sort of, even a little thing like this can just show a bit of support and a bit of love on a really dark day, and how important that they are to keep that up.
Mm-hmm. Um, Thank you so much, Aching Arms Teddy. If anybody wants to reach out to them, their website is www.aching arms.co.uk. So please reach out to them. These teddy bears that they give out say, "You are not alone, someone else has been here too. Your baby mattered, your grief matters. Hold me when your arms are aching." And I think that is deeply personal, and we're so grateful for the work that you do. Um, Megan, what I'll ask you to do for me now is to share with me as much as you want to, or as little as you want to, about the story behind being diagnosed with PTSD, and also your reasons for needing to access the services of Sense Baby Charity, and also the church charity in your local vicinity of Norwich. Now, again, like I said, as much as you want to, I know it's deeply, deeply, like everybody else's story, personal, but very upsetting. So, like I said, share us, please go as deep as you want to, but we'd love to hear your story. So, platform is yours.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So I guess really to take it back, my story begins in the January of 2023, much like any other sort of lady that was in a relationship and thought as a health professional I was making the right choice. So I decided to get a contraceptive implant inserted into my arm. And at the time that this was done, there was a negative pregnancy test. Now, over the series of 4 to 5 months, I began to experience symptoms that were essentially misdiagnosed as potentially mental health conditions, physical health conditions such as Crohn's disease. I went to sort of oncology services and had my breast examined for breast cancer due to pain. A very quite extensive range of blood tests because I reported to them that I started to have some symptoms. The symptoms that I had were symptoms that would be to, I guess, a person without contraceptive implant or was trying for a baby would potentially give them the suspicion of pregnancy. However, when I went to my doctor's surgery on the many occasions, they would ask me about my birth control. I would tell them I'm on the implant and that I don't currently have any periods. And I made the assumption that somebody had at some point tested me. Um, it's one of the assumptions and one of the jokes that we make. You know, when people go into A&E with a broken arm, they get asked for a pregnancy test if they're a lady. So because it was,
Can I interject, Megan? So,
Mhm.
when you say you made the assumption somebody tested you, do you mean you made the assumption that somebody had done a pregnancy test for you?
Yeah, because I was having so many tests taken, which included sort of bloods, sort of feces, going to see secondary specialists. So when it was kind of discussed with them and raised, it was never sort of, when I raised my symptoms, they never seemed like there was going to be any possibility of me being pregnant. It was always sort of it's kind of difficult to explain, I guess, from looking back. But for instance, in the August, I went to the doctors, and one of my tests was an abdominal examination, and that was a physical abdominal examination. And I was on the bed, and I said to the doctor, you know, I'm so glad that this isn't pregnancy because I can't believe what ladies just go through with sickness. And the doctor joked back to me and said, "Oh, if it was pregnancy, we'd have found it by now." So I felt very secure in my relationship with my doctors that this had been excluded somewhere along the line. I couldn't, if somebody asked me had it been done, I wouldn't know to say, but I just didn't, I just made an assumption, as the doctors had made, that it had been tested somewhere because of the level of secondary tests that they were doing. I'd also had a very professional relationship with the doctors as a nurse, so I'd worked with them in a professional capacity, so I trusted their judgment and I trusted their decisions that they made. So when I began to report symptoms and they said to me, you know, this is a side effect of that medication, it made sense. It explained the symptom. And it got to the point, like I said, where I was going pretty much every week to the doctors, and I was going every week with the symptoms, and we were having tests, and one test potentially came back positive for Crohn's disease. So they told me that a lot of my abdominal symptoms were due to a bowel disease. So by the time it kind of got to the mid-August point, I'd had, like I said at that point, my stomach examined. I'd gone taken a lot of medications for sickness, had a lot of tests, and they've kind of ruled back that other than potentially having bowel disease, I was healthy. So I felt pretty, although I had these symptoms, I felt, well, the doctors have done everything they can do to test me for things. They haven't found anything. You know, there's not any really real explanation for it. And I had no idea that they could be the symptoms explained to anything else because I'd never been pregnant before, I hadn't been expecting a baby, and I'd been not been pregnant when the contraceptive implant had been inserted. And as far as I was aware, I'd followed their advice on the contraceptive implant. So I didn't think that it could be, it just wasn't any kind of thought. So it got towards really the end of August, and my health got very worse over the space of 1 week. You know, I couldn't sort of stand up. I was seeing stars, a lot of vomiting. And at this point in my eyes, and I think to the doctors, you know, you wouldn't, I wasn't presenting like a pregnant lady. I was presenting somebody that was unwell, but it wasn't sort of, they didn't, I guess they didn't think it would be due to a pregnancy or for any other reason. So I did phone them up and let them know, look, I'm feeling even worse. And they were just sort of like, well, you're seeing a doctor already, we've had investigations, you know, there's nothing seriously wrong with you, you're okay.
And
The next day,
I'm so sorry. And this is what you were told. There's nothing medically wrong with you. You're okay.
yeah, there's nothing wrong with you. I was told that I felt sick because I was anxious about things. I was told that the breast pain was also a symptom of, they just weren't sure what that was, either anxiety, but they said there was nothing wrong with me. Um, they, they were just basically, when I think about it in hindsight and when you get given the knowledge, it felt very dismissed all along. But at the time, when you're a person that's not feeling well and you trust people to find the answers, I didn't feel like that, you know, they were missing, I guess, the bigger picture. But the thing was, from looking back, is I never once saw the same doctor over about 4 months. So each time I go to the doctor, it would be reporting the same symptoms to somebody new, and there'd be, you know, there was never any like continuity of care or any oversight. So, you know, once they told me that the breast pain was just anxiety based, I didn't really feel comfortable to bring up breast pain again, because they sort of said to me, there's nothing really wrong with your breasts. So as a woman, you're sort of thinking, okay, you know, I'll respect your decision as a doctor because you are more trained than me. That's why I'm coming to you. I'm not a doctor, so I'll accept your advice. So at that point, I was by the end of August just thinking to myself, well, I feel very tired, I feel very achy, and I'm being very sick. But they've told me that there's nothing massively wrong with me, there's nothing wrong, so there's nothing.
Megan, so sorry to interject. This is now August. When did the symptoms actually start? Which month?
May,
May. Okay, so
May,
we
yeah.
started in May, started seeing the doctors, and this is
So
now
I,
August.
yeah, so I guess if you went by a standard woman's timeline, May would, it implies usually I would have been around unknowingly around 4 to 5 months pregnant at that stage. So that is usually the time when women who I guess haven't had a pregnancy before and not noticed start to pick up the signs, which was why I went, I guess, to the doctors to say these are new symptoms. I've not had these before. What can we look into what they are? And because they very naturally asked about my birth control, you know, I assumed, well, they're aware that I'm on birth control, so, you know, why would they never question me again on it? So it sort of wasn't, it just wasn't considered. It just really wasn't, I guess, it was just missed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we led up basically to this is down to the end of August, and that day I woke up after speaking to the duty doctor, who once again had said, you know, that there's nothing that they found was really wrong with me. And I started to experience, when I woke in the morning, symptoms which I thought were like menstrual cramps or like a urine infection. So for me at the time, waking up, because I'd been so sick that week, I didn't really think there was anything unusual with having sort of these symptoms, because I'd had a lot of pain in my stomach and just uncomfortableness for months anyway. So I didn't think, oh, okay, this is anything more than a bad urine infection or a bit of dehydration or constipation. So as the day progressed, the pain started to get worse, and I began to then feel worried, as I was thinking to myself, although I know the symptoms of a urine infection, however, I've never experienced pain like this before, and this isn't something that if I had a patient, I'd be okay. I'd just be a bit confused about. So at that point, I'd been trying to sort of do everything that I could to kind of relax. I'd taken a bath, I'd gone to rest. I came downstairs and I was like, I think at this point now I need to consider calling for medical help, because I don't really know what's going on and I'm worried, because this is something I've never had before. So I was about to kind of reach my phone and call for medical help whilst in the kitchen, and I spontaneously hemorrhaged quite heavily. And in that initial moment, my response was, "Oh my gosh, call 999." So I did. And I called 999 and I explained to them that had recently seen doctors over several months. They said there was nothing seriously wrong with me. I was a registered nurse by profession, so I had some insight into my health, but I'd never experienced this before and was worried. And the response sort of from 999 at that point was that I would get a call back from a doctor within an hour. Unfortunately, in the 10 minutes that followed,
Sorry.
yeah,
I'm so sorry. You're hemorrhaging quite heavily at this time, and you're gonna get a call back from a doctor within an hour.
yes, yeah.
Okay?
So at that point, as you can imagine, when I came off that call, I was a bit like, what do I do? Because I'd started to bleed, I was stood in a position, didn't really know what was going on. And unfortunately, in the 10 minutes after that phone call that passed, I delivered my daughter. My daughter was spontaneously delivered whilst I was sort of stood up fully dressed in the kitchen. And I didn't know in that moment that I had actually delivered a baby, in my mind, because I was perfectly healthy and had no idea that I could
We're
had a
pregnant.
baby.
Yeah.
I thought, that I'd started bleeding, or potentially that there was some sort of prolapse, whether something had happened to my bowel because they thought I maybe had Crohn's, whether something had, I had no idea really. And as I said, unfortunately, I was stood up, and when I did then manage to kind of, undress myself and see, my daughter had passed and she was quite cold. So there was, in that initial moment, not a very shocking situation, I think, as many people can imagine, because there was no sort of full warning and I had not accepted it. So as soon as I realised what had happened, and I sort of checked my daughter over and did lay her down, I called 999 and told them immediately what had happened. Um, at that point, they did stay on the phone with me, but it did take around sort of 25 to 30 minutes for an ambulance to reach me at home. And whilst waiting for the ambulance, I'd still been bleeding quite heavily, so I had to lie on the ground. And unfortunately, it was a case of lying on the ground and waiting half an hour to see if help arrived, because I just couldn't. There was nobody sort of available. Um, Following that sort of experience, and luckily, like I said, an ambulance did arrive. Unfortunately, it was three men, which felt a little bit uncomfortable at the time, considering the circumstance. And I was immediately sort of rushed off to A&E and went into resus. Um, Luckily, in terms of, I guess, my health, not sure quite how, but I was mostly okay, other than sort of, a bit of medication to stop the bleeding. But, I guess because my daughter was very small, I hadn't, when I was managed to get into hospital, there was nothing really that, I guess, in terms of further care that I needed, that was at a life-threatening level. And luckily, I was able to sort of get that immediate care. However, I would say, I guess, at that point, the story, unfortunately, didn't get any easier, or things didn't get any easier. So once I was taken into A&E, I went to the bereavement suite, and I was very alone in hospital. I didn't have anybody that lived close or that I could call to come in and see me. And there had been a very significant and shocking way of events. So I had to then be questioned by police within probably about an hour of getting to the bereavement suite. It wasn't any formal questioning, but it was around how my daughter had died, because they weren't aware that I was pregnant. So obviously, having a call to just say that there's a woman and there's a baby that's not alive is very shocking, and it does require investigation. But like I said, I wasn't supported. So then there was around a 2 hour period of being questioned informally by police on the ward whilst alone, and a very long night alone in the bereavement suite. I will admit, at the time, the midwives at the hospital did pop in and see how I was, but there wasn't really, I guess, an appropriate level of support for that level of trauma, if I'm honest. it didn't feel appropriate, and it felt it was just a very shocking state of affairs. I felt very much in shock from the events. And following that, we had to then have, whilst we were able to spend really good time with my daughter, and my daughter's dad did get brought in by the police in the morning, so he was able to spend good time, and we had sort of family time together. We did have to then have a police officer in the room with us when we were with my daughter, to be able to sort of ask permission to do simple things like hold my daughter, or to touch her, because of the circumstances. And we didn't really get any choice there moving forward on if we were going to have a post-mortem. I guess the choice of what we wanted to do when with my daughter, it was very much a case of paperwork. A lot of the day was paperwork. A lot of plans and agreeing to sort of really quite traumatic things in terms of postmortems, being educated on different types of postmortem, which was something I didn't know beforehand, and quite a lengthy process really. That was a lot of administration within the day in hospital, maybe more so than the focus of me and my daughter, and how I was doing. And following that sort of, I guess, the hospital experience, there was, I guess, in the short of it was, it did lead to, I guess, the trauma of that experience led to a breakdown in the relationship, because it was really significantly damaging towards me and Eliza's father, naturally. And one of the things when people do go through child loss or baby loss is that it's very tough on a relationship, regardless of if you're a perfect couple or married. It's very tough because people grieve so differently. I'm sure you can speak for yourself and your husband. People do grieve differently and have different needs, and you have to be very mindful of that when you're going through grief. That you do have to be mindful of the other person and offering them support. So I wasn't able to. That relationship did break down very fast, sort of after the first week, and I didn't have any close family here. I've always been someone that had concentrated on, I guess, my career and working, and a lot of my work had been night shifts. So I didn't have the, I guess, friend base that you might have in a more maybe run-of-the-mill job, because being as a nurse, you can be antisocial, on social hours. Um, it can sort of take you away, especially shift work, from being able to check in with people at a normal time that you would. So that always kind of isolated me. So I didn't really have anybody close that I could really turn to following this. And it wasn't for any, I guess, deliberate reasons. It was more of a, I guess, a geographical problem, because I think if people had been near, they could help. But because of that breakdown, I was left in a position then, I guess, a week after birth, and I had unfortunately had DVT in this time to add to my tragedies. So I wasn't very physically healthy, but I was left on my own to sort of organise the coroner, funeral, sort of all of the things that you don't necessarily, that a person wouldn't necessarily think of when there's a death, because they're kind of, there's a lot of, this just sounds awful to say, but a lot of paperwork and administration things when a child dies and when you lose a baby. And, there's kind of a focus on, oh, these things have to be done by then, you have to sign this form for this, or get these things done. There's kind of a focus on, rather than the focus necessarily being on you yourself, it's about more duty. Yeah, yeah.
You were pregnant with, and I mean, having a police in the room. I guess there are protocols to follow, but again, timing is everything in a situation like this, isn't it?
It was, and I think that they potentially, I think when I went into hospital, on the face of it, you could look at me and I could speak to you calmly. But the thing is, I think that people didn't understand is that, I have a job or a career where we do face, I have faced in my time medical emergencies, and you have to keep a bit of calm head, an image of composure to manage things. And because I'm a health professional, I'm used to clinical environments. So when I went in, when I told them I was a nurse, I think people, and so I was a professional, and I could understand from a professional point of view, the investigations that they needed to do and what needed to be done. But I think that that's how people potentially saw me, as another professional, whereas in reality, I was a woman that had gone through a very shocking, we see on television and in media stories of cryptic pregnancies where women just don't know they're pregnant until they give birth. And that is a real thing that can exist with women, but it's also more concerning when you have had healthcare, I guess, provided over many months and they've just missed something. And when it's something that's, I guess, so simple and it feels like something that's so essential, it's very difficult in the early days to come to terms with that, because it was one of those cases where, like I said, you reflect on things. And for a long time, I did really blame myself, because I was sort of like, well, why didn't I pick up the signs that every other woman has? Why didn't I do a pregnancy test? And it all came down to the fact of I didn't know. And if I had known, there's no way in hell I'd go through that. I mean, like, in complete honesty, there's no way any woman would want to risk that kind of traumatic event, because it's just it's traumatic. There's no kind of silver lining to the actual event itself. So it was difficult because it was sort of, and although people, when it was investigated and they very clearly showed in the investigation that I was receiving care, that it had been missed, people, when they meet me or on their first impression, they're not going to know that. And it's difficult then to I guess properly explain the situation, because it makes it quite unique in itself, because it's not a case of a situation where I wasn't getting any medical care, or I wasn't seeing somebody, or even I had my stomach examined by a doctor 4 weeks before, but it was still missed. And honestly, if I thought that I was pregnant, I would have done one. And I guess that feeling of, I felt that I had to always defend myself against that I had to defend what had happened, defend that my daughter had somehow naturally died, and that I hadn't in some way not got support when I clearly had. And that for me, I guess, was the big thing that took me a while, especially the few months, to advocate for myself and to get that support, because I didn't have the compassion at the time, although um, there was some good care and there was empathetic individuals. The circumstances and the trauma of it kind of took over that, and the biggest thing and the most dominant feeling from that time. And it wasn't sort of, like I said, when I was in hospital overnight, that whole day in hospital, I never saw anybody from a mental health team. I never saw like a specialist for mental health. I never had somebody to sit with me, with the police. There was nobody that kind of just made, yeah, it was just me and a female woman in plain clothes. There was nobody with me, even just like a little thing to like hold my hand. And that was really tough. And I guess that draws back into, I guess, why, for some reason, why it's then became, I guess, so important to speak about it, but also to tell people actually how I think that people potentially, when it comes to mental health, and like we said, it isn't a weakness, and nobody asks for a mental health condition, and it kind of in some ways doesn't matter about even the person that you are. You can be a fully qualified professional, you could work in mental health, but actually there's some things in life, circumstances that you could go through which you may never expect, that you have to face, and that you in some way sort of, they're just completely, just a completely weird situation that you would never expect, a trauma that you could never plan for necessarily, and actually how important it is, because I think like we touched on things like shame and guilt before. Really, guilt was one of those things, and shame. Like when I say that I dragged myself over hot coals, I really did. There was long and painful nights where all I would think about was, what more could I have done? Where I'd spend it in patterns going through medical notes and trying to look for answers that weren't there. And it was really upsetting then, and a thing to say, actually, I was really unlucky in a lot of ways, because it was such a simple error and oversight, but it cost me so much, really, and impacted me so much. So important that, yeah, that it is in a lot of ways that we can talk about it and speak about these things, because, I guess, like I said, I looked over things very hard, and actually learning kind of acceptance and forgiveness. And forgiveness isn't, so to speak, accepting blame. It's actually just accepting, this is what happened. These were the events that happened. Had I known that things were different, would I have done something? 100%. But I can never change that, unfortunately. And you just have, sometimes you have to dig deep to find the positives in that,
Of course.
um, and find a purpose. And I think a lot of it has been, like I said, a lot of soul searching since then. But unfortunately, my circumstances were key factors for PTSD. Traumatic events, lack of support. So I was quite aware earlier on that I was potentially facing developing that, because I didn't have the barriers or the safety nets in place to protect myself from that. Um, because I didn't have the support that I needed at that time. And why it then became so important that when I was able to realise that, to access that support in any way that I could find. And at that time, maybe I didn't feel comfortable with speaking to a stranger in a therapy or a counselling session, but I could speak to somebody else, another woman. I could perhaps speak, there was little steps that I could take to make myself comfortable in speaking more openly. And I guess that's sort of part of our speech today, is actually letting women know that, you have their time, and take it within their own time, and hopefully make them feel empowered to do those little steps. Sometimes it doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be shouting out to the world, I've lost my baby and I'm feeling really upset. It can just be, contacting somebody on a SAMS group, a support group, who has gone through that, and can relate, even though they are very significant or different experiences. I find that I can relate to a lot of women, because we all have that same pain and grief. Um, you know, we want our babies. It's, in an ideal world, our children would be here. Um, so I find that we can sort of relate to each other, I guess, in that way. I guess that's my story. I'm sorry if anybody's sort of been horrified or upset in that. It's an upsetting story, really. I think because I've had to talk about it so much, just to get people to understand, in terms of communication in healthcare professionals, in workplaces. I'm a bit more open about talking about it than I potentially would have been. I wouldn't have been comfortable at the time. But I guess it's all growth and healing on the journey, to be like, well, actually, I'm in this place now where I can go on, a live chat and say that this is something that happens, and, feel empowered to do that from my experience.
Thank you thank you so much, Megan. Um, I sympathize with you. I am so sorry that you've had to experience this. This is
Thank
not many
you.
years ago. This is what,
No,
3 years ago?
no,
Three
that it's
years
not.
ago.
It's not even 3 years yet. It's less than 2 years. It's actually 19 months. So this
Oh
is
my goodness.
yeah. This is less than 2 years ago, and I guess,
I'm sorry.
in some ways it probably goes to show, in a lot of ways, I guess, after around sort of in the first year of the loss, I actually took a lot of time to focus on myself, and in some ways that was, um, because that was what my focus was on, and my priority was. In this situation, it did teach me that in some ways it's very important to advocate for yourself,
You have
and
to. You have
you
to.
have to, because if you don't have anybody to advocate for you, then sometimes nobody will, and that's when you can develop mental health conditions, when you can develop sort of severe trauma. So that you have to feel empowered to speak up for yourself and to stand up for yourself. And I think because in a way I was very easily able to feel like I can stand up for my daughter, but I didn't very easily feel like I could stand up for me. I could loudly shout my daughter's name and how much I loved her, but could I say truly that I love myself? and at that moment in time I couldn't. So I had to take a lot of sort of personal work, if you know what I mean, reflection, quiet time, focus on key relationships, and in some ways pushing myself. So I've always been a person that I don't like to get too comfortable, and I like to have a bit of a challenge. So having some realistic sort of challenges as well, but also, like I said, that compassion and love. For instance, one of the things I like to do is every few months I like to get away just for even a little weekend. It doesn't have to be anywhere fancy, but it's something I look forward to. And actually putting something in place like that. Well, every 2 months I'm going to prioritise at least just a night away from things, just a night away, not in the same house, because this house is unfortunately where my trauma occurred. So it's nice to have that breathing space, and putting little things in place can actually help you then to become a lot more empowered overall.
Oh, Megan, I'm sending you lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of virtual hugs and comfort. Now,
Thank you.
I can't even rush past this stage because I just wouldn't be doing your story any justice, and I apologize if it seems like I'm doing that.
No, it's okay.
You spoke about just before we speak about the charities and we wrap up. Again, I'm so sorry for the experience that you've had. I'm
Thank
so
you.
sorry. A simple thing, something as simple as a pregnancy test was missed for 7 months. I mean, you were told you had Crohn's disease at some point, checked for cancer of
I think that
cancer of
the
the
most,
breast,
yeah, cancer of the breast, Crohn's disease. I had
Crohn's disease,
like
mental health
blood tests,
challenges.
blood tests for cancer genes, so genetic tests, because they were concerned of autoimmune disorders as well. Um, and also, I think one of the hardest things for me is that I was diagnosed when I was around a month pregnant with a mental health condition due to mood instability. I'd never had this diagnosed ever before. I'd never taken nothing. It had never been mentioned. But when I was 4 weeks pregnant, somebody questioned it. And so instead of actually then having, I guess, the compassion and empathy throughout the whole 7 months of actually the focus of this is a first time pregnant lady with a history of, I guess, depression, that is probably going to find it's finding this very hard. I was sort of treated very separately as somebody that was having a mood swing, potentially just due to becoming unreasonable or for any other reason. When the fact was it was pregnancy,
Yeah,
and
um,
it's quite upsetting to. It was upsetting for when I realised I'd been treated like that, because I was like, but I'm not. I wouldn't say that I'm any a special kind of person. I'm just a normal working woman. I have a career. I lived on my own, pay my own rent. I'd say I'm educated, but
I'm so sorry to interject. It's not even about trying to be or feel special. It's just a basic human right and access to services available for us to access.
mm,
That's just simply it. And I mean, it's just unfortunate that it was overlooked. I
it's
mean, I don't want to elaborate on how simple it is. Because
and that was the key learning that was taken when they did do the perinatal mortality sort of review tool. The key learning and the key issue identified is that all health professionals should know to take pregnancy tests in women of childbearing age, and it was sort of like, that's so simple.
yeah.
That shouldn't be a learning point at this point. That shouldn't be a learning point for a doctor, that they need to know to when to take a pregnancy test. Um, and I'll defend. I defend that opinion, because I think that's a realistic view to have. That as a woman going to a doctor, you think that a basic test like that would be ruled out with symptoms of that nature. Unfortunately, it wasn't done, I don't think, for any malicious reasons, but I think lack of coordination and care, lack of the same person, just lack of maybe somebody really listening, and just taking her overall ended up in a really terrible mistake and really terrible event that cost me a lot, really. Um, and as never, I would say, has not really, I've not really seen much of, an impact from the service providers that would realistically show that they considered that. But I think it's when you lose a baby, it is a journey of acceptance in some ways, and for me,
And
part of
forgiveness.
my acceptance, yeah, part of
Forgiveness
my,
too, which you touched
yeah,
on. Sorry to interject, which you touched on earlier. It's not only
mm,
forgiveness of those whom you want to hold accountable, as in, you're a professional, you could have done more, why didn't you do more? It's also forgiveness of self. And that's the biggest, for me, that was the biggest hiccup. Can I forgive myself and move past this? And and
yeah,
and and do you feel like you've gotten to the point where you have been able to forgive yourself?
yes, yes. I think it took a while to truly say that, really, to I guess forgive yourself. I think it was because I think when I looked at everything, and to be honest, like I don't actually hold any personal anger towards anybody, or I guess a particular person accountable. And I'm also aware that I don't think anything was done ever with a malicious intent. I think that it it wasn't maliciously done, but the mistake was made, and that's really important.
Of
I guess
course.
really important to I guess state, and also I think it was important for myself on my own road to it, my own journey to forgive myself, because it was sort of like having that kind of awareness, and I guess that the rationale of being like, you know, was there, have you ever, did I ever do anything purposely? Would I have wanted this? In all honesty, no, I wouldn't. And if I could have done something, I would have. So actually, truthfully, I do feel like I could forgive myself because I know that my daughter knows that she's loved. So for me, that to me was I guess the biggest healing thing is because
Hmm.
I I really love my daughter, and I guess I feel confident that she knows that. So it was okay, I guess not okay, but I began to learn how to deal with that personally and how to extend that own kindness to myself by extending it to others in a weird way. When they say, forgiving, it's like if not to forgive a murderer or to forgive, but when you've had something, I guess, terrible happen to you, it can feel that emotional at the time. And actually, even though it's not true, it can feel like that's true. It can feel very personal and very deep, and with time, you're able to actually see,
Of
maybe
course.
take those emotions out of it and actually be like, well, to be more rational and to be more like, well, do you really think it was personal? I don't think it's personal. And in my eyes, never, I guess, never been a person to hold anything against anybody if they've made an honest mistake. Because if you made an honest mistake, you apologise and we learn to move on the best we can. So I think that's helped me to get that.
Hmm. That's great. That's really, really great. Um, Thank you, Megan. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us about little Eliza.
Thank you,
Really
no problem.
appreciate you. I guess this is an appropriate term to use in this capacity, given what you've just shared, bearing your soul.
Well,
Um,
I've done one more bearing my soul. I've actually bared Eliza because I have this little. I got it on Mother's Day, and it's actually got her handprint engraved on a necklace, but it also carries some of her ashes. So now I always have. I don't know if I can show the little handprint on the camera. Can you see that?
yes, I can see it. Yes.
So actually, it has a little bit of my daughter's ashes in with me, and so now it's always on a little necklace. So I actually kind of feel like I'm taking Eliza into the everywhere we go now because she's around my neck, literally as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so, so, so much for sharing with us. Now, one of the things that you touched on in closing is the Baby Lost Charity Sons, that was very helpful to you in the process of your healing and your recovery to date. I can't say that you've recovered. You haven't shared that with me. So I'll just say your recovery to date. SANS is a baby loss charity in the UK, and it supports anyone affected by the death of a baby, whether it's before, during, or shortly after birth. They have helplines, they have local support groups. I know they have volunteers. I read about their volunteers and the phenomenal work these people are doing without being paid. Um, and they have lots of training for healthcare professionals. And basically, their campaign really is just to improve maternity care and reduce baby deaths. Now, some baby deaths are preventable. We acknowledge that some aren't. And again, this isn't a blame game. Like I said, it's just a humanitarian platform for us to come together and roar as men and women. We're petitioning for better maternal care for parents of for bereaved parents of babies lost. There's also Aiken Arms, which is another baby loss charity, the one that gave Megan the teddy bear. Um, and that's for bereaved parents as a sign of comfort and solidarity. Every bear is dedicated in memory of another baby. And they also work closely with hospitals and maternity units. So if you work in a hospital or any kind of a maternity unit, please do just check them out. Tommy's as well. Tommy's is a well-known baby loss charity. There's a miscarriage association. I That's the one that I read a lot of their that's the website I went on in my times of loss, and I read a lot of people's stories, and it encouraged me. It helped me a lot. Um Again, they are strong on medical information and prevention, and recently they have been able to do some absolutely incredible work. Please go on their website, read about it. They have great coping tools and resources for partners too. Partners are very, very, very often overlooked. My goodness, partners are so overlooked, it's not funny. So the Miscarriage Association is great for that. There's also Petals, the baby loss counseling charity. Remember My Baby is another, and there's so many others. There are lots of men and women who are doing things in honor of their children lost, babies lost. And if you'd like a list of them, please feel free to go on to Google or my LinkedIn page. My name is Alicia Robinson Asamaning. I tend to ever so often give a shout out and a thank you to baby loss charities. Again, Megan, thank you so, so, so much. I really appreciate you being with us today. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate you sharing your story. It's meant so much to me. You just coming and being so open about it. Now I
Thank
know
you.
that you're a nurse, and so you would have had you do have some medical knowledge, and so I know if obviously you knew of your pregnancy, and a woman doesn't necessarily have to have medical knowledge or be a medical professional to know that she's pregnant and do something about it. It's just naturally instinctive that we would do something. So again, very, very unfortunate situation to have suffered. And I completely sympathize with you. And I'm, again, completely sorry for your loss. I apologize about getting the dates mixed. I thought it was 2022. So I apologize for saying
No,
it was
that's
2 years
okay.
ago. But thank you, Megan. I'm sure we'll have more YouTube lives because I know I've heard aspects of your story you haven't shared today. So we'll delve deeper into other aspects not shared today. One of the other things that Megan told me about was energy companies. Please, 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 if you're in a situation of having just experienced baby loss, please contact your energy companies. They sent Megan flowers. Some of them sent money vouchers to be able to help her. So please do, help is available. Okay. Please follow my LinkedIn page. Please follow my YouTube page, and there'll be lots and lots and lots of information and resources to encourage you and to lead you to pointers of help. Thank you so much again, Megan. I enjoyed spending this
Thank
time
you.
with you. and I enjoyed hearing your story of recovery. And sadly, it had
Thank
to
you so
take the
much,
loss
Liz,
of
for
a life
sharing
to
your
get here.
story.
But thank you.
Thank you.
Not a problem at all. I'll speak to you soon. Take care and bye for now.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye for now.